Okay, so we know one of the biggest driving factors of someone succeeding in the body transformation journey, both on the route to checkpoint and after checkpoint, is how well you manage stress. Because it's your response to stress that will trigger whether you start snacking at night, using food as a crutch, just effectively using destructive behaviors in a way to manage stress. And just off air before we got recording, Ivan, you mentioned that one of the biggest myths out there is that stress impacts women the same as men. And I thought it was a really
Mm.
interesting discussion point to potentially start this women's special podcast on. So over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, I think especially in the transformation world, a lot of women are treated very similar to men when it comes to dieting and, getting as lean as possible, this and that. And don't get me wrong, many of the principles, or pretty much all the principles, remain the same. We need a calorie deficit over time. We need to strength train. We need to do enough activity to, you know, continue that deficit if needed. But what many people miss in this realm, I think, is that the how much stress a woman can take, most women, can be not as much as most people think. And what I mean by that is not like, oh, they can't handle life or this and that, things get the better of them. It's just that their stress, their response to things like dieting, their response to things like excessive activity is far more pronounced than it would be in males. So what I mean by that is, many women, again, can be prone to water retention. They can be prone to, not seeing the progress on the scale move as quickly in comparison to a male. And this is due to various factors, such as the menstrual cycle, which we know has monthly fluctuations, which are all part of the process, regardless. But from an actual stress perspective, remember, dieting is a stress. Getting leaner is a stress to some degree. And if you do push women, um, if we are pushing women too hard from the get-go every single week, trying to drop more than 1% per week for a while, they seem to run into roadblocks a lot quicker than males. Okay, so this is why, even though the principles do remain the same, there must be, I would say, more careful attention paid to how much activity we're prescribing, or any coach out there is prescribing, because again, adding more and more stress to anyone in general is never going to be a good thing. But this does seem to be more prevalent in females, especially older females, especially women coming into menopause, where hormones are already starting to, go a little bit haywire, to to say the least. The last thing you want to be doing is piling on excessive activity, especially in these populations. And one of the biggest things that we see with women over 45, 50, 55 is, they'll start undertaking things like CrossFit, or wanting to ramp up their activity, or do a ton of, like, join a running club, or you know what I mean, do these crazy things from an activity standpoint, not knowing that they would be far better off just focusing on their diet, going for a couple walks, strength training 2 to 3 times a week, and that's it. And then anything on top, that is a really, really good baseline for anyone to start off with, but especially for women that are above 50 as well.
So just to jump in on a few of those things, you mentioned they run into roadblocks. What sort of roadblocks are we talking about here?
Uh, well, one of them would be metabolic adaptation as well. So what that simply means is that every time anyone diets, you're always going to have some metabolic adaptation, meaning that, as you're dieting down, metabolism's going to fight you back a little bit. It's going to slow things down to prevent further weight loss. That is a completely normal part of fat loss, and it's to be expected. But this does seem to be a lot more prevalent in females. They do seem to get hit a bit harder with it, especially at high body fat percentages. And that's because women naturally carry more body fat than males, anywhere up to 10%. So a male at 5% body fat would be similar to a female at 15% body fat, as a reference point, right? So women are more protective of losing body fat. Okay, the body will fight them back harder, especially as they get towards the end of their, say, settling point, or where they feel comfortable at. And a really good marker, or a really good way to sort of know if the stress of what the individual is doing is too high, are subjective things, such as, probably the biggest one, in my opinion, is the loss of the menstrual cycle. If that is something that has been quite consistent for a while, and then it starts to disappear, you start missing cycles, this and that. Not only is that it's not only is that a determinant of just your overall health, but it can be a really good sign that maybe you are pushing things a bit too hard on all fronts. And this is not to say that every woman who is dieting to get lean loses their cycle. We've had females get into really lean condition without losing their cycle. Sanjita is coach Sanjita is a really good example here. She got down to photo shoot condition, never lost her cycle. Okay. But not many women fall into that same category. And, some can lose it at higher body fat percentages. Some can lose it even higher. So I think in general, it's a good barometer of overall stress load, if anything. So
is it stress management? Is it like, so someone who's losing it earlier on, is it just their body's perceiving a higher level of stress on the body?
Correct.
Yeah.
And again, that's not just dieting, right? Remember, dieting is a stress, but so is everything else. Remember, we've spoken about the stress cut before. Stress is stress is stress. Okay. So, and again, this is another reason why, we personally don't like advocating a ton of activity for a lot of females until it's necessary, like towards the end of a checkpoint, because that additional activity for many people is just an additional stressor that these people have to recover from, or these women have to recover from. And we know, like, we deal with many busy people. We have busy lives, working 12, 16-hour days at times. Like, they have enough stress in their life. The last thing they need is to add even more stress on top of that,
Do you think this is why women can benefit and really almost need to embrace long investment phases where they're building muscle, that once they get to that sort of settling point that you mentioned, where the reality is, if they're going to get to the next level, they're going to have to push so hard that it's a fine balance, right? And this is where they can spend long times building muscle and effectively building healthy habits so they don't start from, when they next diet down, they don't start from a position where they're already starting at 1,500 calories.
100%.
And in bad habits.
Exactly. I think many women should spend more time either at maintenance or trying to, I would recommend most women not being in a deficit for so long. And unfortunately, with diet culture, with, expectations on women, now men as well, a lot of women are in a perpetual dieting cycle, always dieting, right? But never actually getting to their dream physique, if that makes sense. So they always feel like they're dieting, but they don't have the physique to show. And yeah, I think many women, especially if they have a shift in their mindset. Now, again, when women initially do come to us, most of the time it is to drop body fat, and it is to get to a really, lean condition. And that can definitely happen. But I think after that, once we've dieted you down, I would rather not see you diet again for a long time, a very, very long time. I would recommend staying at maintenance, slowly building muscle if that's what you want to do, and restoring your metabolic health. Because as I said earlier, with the whole impact of stress, AV, you just recently came out of your like crazy shredded photo shoot condition, right? And that took you a few months to really recover from. If a woman went down to that same level and then try to reverse out, that process could be exponentially higher. There was a research paper I read a while ago where they followed one figure competitor. So she's a figure competitor, really good eating habits, no yo-yo dieting for a while. She got down to stage level condition for figure, just, pretty lean. It took her, after she got back to her normal weight and got back to her normal body fat levels, it still took her almost a year to get her menstrual cycle back after that
Wow.
Event. Yeah. Now, that's not the norm. That is just like N of one. So it was just one competitor. But the whole point I'm trying to make here is that women who are perpetually dieting all the time in this cycle of dieting, binging, that whole yo-yo thing, you are doing your metabolic health and mental health a massive disservice there. And again, females, unfortunately, take the brunt of that much harder than a male would, which is unfair, but unfortunately is the reality.
Well, it's like, you mentioned something around the settling point and then getting the dream physique, because when you diet down for the first time, the reality of having the quote unquote dream physique is very, very low. Because what tends to happen, it's come up in conversation a lot with our members, is that they're worried that when they get to their checkpoint, they're still going to have some, in their words, like flabby arms. They're still gonna, their glutes aren't going to really be there as what they thought they might be when the body fat goes, or they're still going to have a lot of body fat. But the risk is like if they try and lose that body fat, there's going to be nothing left. And it's
Yeah.
like, this is why women really need to embrace that investment mindset, because it comes, the whole adage of like, we overestimate how much muscle mass we have and underestimate how much body fat we have rings just as true for women, if not potentially more, because
Way more. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they
Agreed.
naturally carry more body fat, and because they've never really done a lot of progressive strength training, they find
Yep.
themselves not really in the body that they thought they might have underneath all the body
Yep.
fat.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think many of them potentially see someone who's in really good shape and they see them at the end of a diet. They see them on a photo shoot on a cover of a magazine, right? And they're like, oh, I want to have arms like that, or I want to have glutes like that. But what they don't realize is that that woman on that cover has probably spent years building her physique for a long time before she even considered dieting down, right? She, you cannot just stay at that lean condition forever and expect to make any sort of progress, right? So yeah, I agree. I think if more women could see that long-term vision of, okay, and it goes beyond just looking good on a cover or looking good at the beach or whatever. And those are great things. But we've spoken about the benefits of having muscle mass on you as just from a health perspective, right? Like being able to just be strong in life. And again, osteoporosis and bone disorders are far more common in women as well, which is unfortunate. Okay. So if you don't carry much muscle mass, if you don't resistance train, if you don't keep yourself active, the chances of you suffering from osteoporosis increase dramatically, especially during menopause, where estrogen starts to plummet, because estrogen plays a huge role in keeping our bones healthy. So yeah, I know it's definitely a hard sell, because many women, I think this is another myth. They think that building muscle is going to make them really really bulky. You know what I mean? And that's just not the case. Like it's
If it was,
what
then
makes people
guys would be, you see
bulking.
more jack guys, right?
100%. What makes I think what makes a lot of people bulky is just eating too many calories for what they need. That's what makes you bulky, not
Yeah.
lifting weights, right?
And I
So
think the beauty of it for women, if they've never really done progressive strength training, is that even if they're eating at maintenance, they're going to get a lot of these beginners gains where they can
massive.
effectively get that recomposition effect that you can't always get a couple of years later down the line. So it's almost worth maximizing this opportunity. Ed, how would you set this up for someone who's thinking like, all right, now I've dieted down, I'm quite not quite happy with where I've got to. I've still seen some flabby areas, my glutes aren't where they want to get to. Like, what's the next step for this, and what does that look? What does the journey actually look like?
So I think at that point, you'd hope that at least habits and a good routines in place. If they've got to their checkpoint, even if it's not the checkpoint they envisaged originally, or isn't that end checkpoint goal they've got, they should have a routine of training, being control of their nutrition. So the foundation's already there. And then, so like you said, I'd bring them up to around a maintenance level. That will then aid a lot of the negative kind of repercussions from dieting that Ivan mentioned. And just say that this is going to be the same for men as well. It's going to be harsher for women, but the same process is really going to be involved. Once those things are back in a good place, so let's say like menstrual cycle is there, sleep's good, libido's good, they're not craving food, definitely in control of their eating patterns, then we can either start to increase weight in a very controlled way, or just hold them at maintenance. That's normally going to come down to two things, really. One, their actual desire. I think especially for women, the thought of planned weight gain or any weight gain can be quite a scary kind of aspect to take on. So some people, I think it's great just to get going with maintenance. But then number two is also the quality of their training. If the quality of the training is good, then potentially the option is there to push up weight in a controlled way, because they're providing that stimulus to ensure that some of the weight that comes on is going to be muscle, because unfortunately some of it's going to be fat either way. What we want to avoid is it all being fat if training's terrible. If training isn't in a great place, I would recommend holding at maintenance, fixing training to ensure that then the stimulus is being applied, and then you've got the stimulus going in. You can then adjust calories coming in to then adjust how you want body weight to go from there. So the main focus really is controlling nutrition, normally sitting around a maintenance, and then all shifts onto performance. And that's where the big mindset shift has to come. And I think this can be quite hard if you are used to being in that diet culture, you are a woman who's potentially been on a diet from 14, 15 years old sometimes. Now you're in your mid-30s, 40s, whatever it is. You've always seen the number on the scale going down. You've always, associated that with like health and fitness and things. But now the focus needs to go to the logbook basically, or gym performance, and viewing yourself more as an athlete rather than as a dieter. And so, yeah, focusing on the logbook, progressing your lifts. This is where training videos are invaluable to make sure that the numbers in the logbook progressing are actually equating to what's going on in the real world. And then really just rinse and repeating and being patient. And I think it's easy after you hit that first checkpoint, you feel a bit skinny, you don't have as much muscle, you're really motivated to build muscle. 3 months down the line, are you still as motivated? 6 months down the line, 9 months down the line? Truth is, for naturals, if it's going to take a little bit of time to kind of recoup after that initial fat loss phase, a year after it, you've potentially only really been doing like proper muscle building for like maybe 9-10 months. That's not going to be night and day, unfortunately. Realistically, it's probably going to be a 2-year thing. But if you want to make really significant progress, potentially you can even keep pushing that on for longer. But I would kind of see that 18-month to 2-year mark as a baseline recommendation. It's not sexy. It's not sexy as dropping weight or getting your abs back out, whatever it is. But that's what's going to allow you to have that muscle, so that when next time you do start to take some of that body fat off, you get to the same weight potentially, but you don't have flabby arms. Your arms are now toned, or your ass isn't flat anymore. It's now, it's got some shape.
So Ed, you've mentioned fixing training quite often in that, and I know one of your biggest pet peeves is poor training intensity, especially those people who are muscle building or have muscle building ambitions. Can you elaborate on what fixing training actually means, and how do you actually fix it?
So I think the pet peeve for me is actually just the misalignment of expectations when it comes to it. I think if you enjoy going to the gym and you like just being in there, you like kind of going through the motions, you've got friends or whatever, then brilliant. There's nothing wrong with that at all. The issue, I think, is when you are under the perception that you're going to be building muscle, you're doing what you can to build muscle, when in reality it's just not the case. And that would normally come down to 2 things. Number one being form, being good. Not only is that going to help prevent injuries, to make sure you actually can just actually train. Said it's probably going to be like a 2-year process to see a significant change. If you're injured for a year of it, that's already, you might spend 2 years doing in a muscle building phase, but if you're only training for a year, you're not going to get 2 years results. But also it's just going to really dictate the effectiveness of the exercises. It sounds a bit stupid, but if I said I really want to build my biceps and I got on a leg press, people are like, what are you on about? That's not training your biceps. And that's like an extreme example. But if you're doing dumbbell curls and you're swinging your hips,
I thought you're going to mention something.
The hormonal.
Yeah. I was like,
legs, my upper body grows.
Where's it going with this one? I was like, am I missing something? Yeah.
This has come a bit from left field, but
you can talk about how hard you grip the leg press handles.
If you look at some people doing dumbbell curls, most of the movements coming from either shrugging or like hip extension. Their biceps is responsible for very little of that movement. And so, although it sounds stupid, the leg press example, maybe a bit confusing, but it's, unless you're actually training that muscle, the muscle's not going to grow. And that's where form comes in so much. If you are swinging your hips around to do a bicep curl, your bicep's not going to grow. You actually have to train your bicep. Then once that form's in place, part 2 of that is then matching it with sufficient effort. And I think this is a hard thing to quantify because it's so subjective, and I think even the research is far from telling us the full picture. But what we do know is you have to train hard. There's so much debate out there. Do you have to go to failure? Do you not? Technically, we don't have to go to failure. Research seems to suggest like 4 or 5 reps away from failure is sufficient. I actually think we can go further away from that probably, because when I look at some people who do make some muscle gains, they're still miles way out from that. I think some people, especially when you're new, when you actually look at how poor the effort level is, they're probably like 10 reps out and they're still making some kind of progress. So
how long do you think you can milk that for? Because or do we just have like a warped perception of this whole thing where
I don't know,
we just associate you got to be like 1-2 reps shy?
I think it's so hard because
to actually build muscle, not just like maintain.
I think the scope that you've got available to make practice is just going to decrease over time. So day 1 in the gym, maybe you can be 15 reps shy of failure, let's just say. 5 years in, that may have dropped down to say the 5 mark or whatever it is from there.
Well, beginners can grow by like literally walking, right? Or cycling.
I think
steady state cycling, quads can grow.
Yeah, I think there was a study showed. I think it was in the first 12 weeks of basically an exercise intervention. There was one group who did running, and the other group did resistance training. And the results in terms of improved fitness and improved like muscle mass were the same across both groups. They were fully untrained to that. Now that's not going to continue on, otherwise, you know, Ronnie Coleman and Usain Farah.
Usain Farah.
I'm getting confused with
yeah.
my athletics, but Mo Farah would, you know, have the same physique, which obviously isn't the case.
Well, here's what's interesting. What do you think? What do you think out of the two? Because you know, you get those guys who are like, I'm saying guys because it's typically them. They train pretty hard in the gym, but their form is atrocious. When you finally get their form right and they actually diet down properly, they've actually got a decent amount of muscle underneath them. You know that kind of that type, right? But then you got the other end of the spectrum of the guys who are going in the gym, they've got perfect form, or they've only got the best form, but they're just not training hard. And they're not getting anywhere. And when they diet down, they've got no muscle to show for it. Out of the two, if you had to like, without me giving a leading answer there, like, which one do you see most? Because
I think if you want some muscle on you, you're going to just have to train hard. You're probably going to have to accept you might get a bit beaten up on the way. As a coach and someone who I think our first job is to cause no harm, second job is then to get results, I would always then push the form side of it first. But I think also a really important point to make is you've maybe got like train good form or train hard, but then actually if you really train hard, you do both. Because what you do when you use crap form is you run away from actual hard work and pain. What happens when you're in the leg press set and it's getting hard? You stop going as deep. Well, that's because the bottom is the hardest part. So you're running away from that pain, or you stop controlling the eccentric. So you get a bit of a rest on the way down. Obviously, you then have to then catch it at the bottom, but you get like a split second of rest. You stand up between squats and you take 10 seconds, like 10 breaths before your next rep. Again, you're just resting. All of these like cheats or bad form, it's all trying to either put it onto another muscle or just basically take tension away from the target muscle. So if you think you're training hard, use good form, because then you're running into pain rather than away from it. But obviously, good pain, referring to.
I remember a bodybuilder said to me like maybe 5-6 years ago. So if you want to build your legs, just think about when during the set you're trying to run yourself into a wall without stopping. And do that consistently enough for a few years, and you'll get there. And really, that mindset of just like running yourself into a wall is probably a really good one to have. Just making sure every single rep is perfect. But just circling back to women specifically, if we look at sort of what mainstream media and a lot of what many women have grown up seeing, where I don't know if it's Jane Fonda or whoever the person is, but it's always half reps, tiny weights. And if you think about a lot of the body parts that women want to build, let's say the glutes, and you see these like knee bend squats where they're literally just bending their knees slightly, or they're doing split squats and lunges where they're barely going down, or their hip thrusts, similar sort of thing. I think range of motion is such an underutilized thing for women, especially because they've grown up seeing half reps all the time. And if you go in the gym a lot of times, you only see these half reps being done with light weights. And then you wonder why they're not getting the booty that they want, because that's a big one for them, right? And I think if we're thinking about exercises like the squat, like the split squat and lunges, just like Ed said, don't run away from that pain of being in the bottom of the squat or bottom of the split squat, because you're probably going to get the most gains from that.
Yeah, it's the most productive part, right? Recent research is showing that the stretch component of these exercises is where the real money is, right? So if you're going to do half reps out the bottom, but ideally do full reps. So that's a good point. I didn't think of that actually. Yeah, many women would have been grown up with just half reps and those like classes that they do.
Yeah, the classes think about the squats in the classes. You got like a 10-kilo barbell and you're just going down like couple inches up and down, right?
I think it's a coach's fault. It's a coach's fault.
Yeah. But then women translate that into the gym, and it's like then they've suddenly got to go all the way, and then there's the fear of like going all the way because there's associations of like, oh, I'm gonna get hurt or
gonna get bulky.
So all of these things tie in.
I think it all falls under the umbrella of like women have been guided away from hard training. It's always been a softer approach, and whether that is making the range of motion less, doing fluffier exercises, don't use weights, use bands, whatever it is. But the thing is also, I think there is a lot of parallels to to men as well. It's just instead of glutes, it's biceps or it's abs. You know, the 10-minute ab routine, put an inch on your arms in a month or whatever it is. It's these quick fixes where it's like people who haven't got results thinking they're doing the standard stuff. They think they need this magic pill, where it's like, actually, you just haven't done the standard stuff properly yet.
So let's say you've got a woman who's dieted down and she actually has lost her period, because this is obviously a very common experience for many women. How do you get it back beyond, let's say the first, they go to maintenance, they follow these things and it still doesn't come back. What do you do next? Do you just continue? Is there anything you should be paying attention to? I saw something the other day and someone was saying, she showed a picture of herself from like having abs and then not having abs. And she said, you guys might think this is the wrong way around, but it's actually I've missed 100 periods in a row.
Correct.
And I finally got it back. And this is one of the happiest moments of my life.
Yeah.
And I read it and I was like, wow, this is a really legit problem. And 100 periods in a row, that's, I don't know how many years, over 2 years, right?
Yeah, it's massive. And this is what a lot of people do not see. Okay. They see the Instagram photos of the beautiful abs or whatever it is. They see that, or they come in and go, hey, I want abs, right? But what many do not realize, especially with to get into that condition, you don't know what that woman is suffering from behind closed doors. For many women, getting abs and maintaining very visible abs all year long is simply not realistic.
No.
Because your body fat levels are too low. We know that when body fat levels get too low, and again, this goes back to the stressing that we were talking about earlier, being too lean is a stressor. Okay. Females are far more important in this world than we are. Unfortunately, they are responsible for, producing more children. They need to survive. We can die off tomorrow. If they figure out a way to impregnate themselves, but we're pretty much useless in comparison to females when it comes to the survival of the species, right? So this is why there are many mechanisms that come into protection to prevent a woman from getting super lean. One of them, again, is menstrual cycle dysfunction and whatnot. So if your body fat levels are too low for too long, you will lose your reproductive capacity, okay? Because that's your body's way of telling you, hey, you need more fuel on you to potentially, feed a growing baby, right? You cannot grow a living baby inside of you with very little body fat or mass on you. That's simply what it comes down to, right? So if again, for many women who want to achieve they want to get their abs and they want them to be on show year round, for many, that's just not realistic because of these implications, right? You need to bring your body fat levels need to come up to a healthy amount that you need to be happy with. And unfortunately, social media, diet culture has skewed that completely, massively, thinking that, any woman could get down to this condition, get the abs out, and they just live there for the rest of their life. Now, can some women do it? For sure. Okay. Just like there are people can stay lean depending on various factors. For if a woman stores majority of her body fat in, say, her hips and legs, maybe her upper body can stay relatively lean in comparison because her total body fat is still relatively high. That's great, but you cannot control where you store body fat, right? So if you're a woman who has most of their body fat around their midsection, for you to get really lean, number one is going to be for you to get really lean. Yes, it can be done for a moment in time, for a photo shoot, for just celebrating, something really cool. You've managed to do it, but to actually live there, definitely not. We do not recommend that to anyone when we work with them because of these very reasons. And how long does it take to recover? As I mentioned earlier, it could take 6 months, a year and a half. Again, I haven't had any problems with people recovering their menstrual cycle for longer than 3-6 months, but it takes buy-in from that individual to understand, hey, body fat needs to come up, food needs to come up. You need to be, you need to not be afraid of eating, not be afraid of gaining some body fat. It's reframing body fat as something that is actually healthy. Some body fat is healthy. It's not the disgusting piece of flab that you can pinch, right? And that's what a lot of people come into this whole world with, thinking that, I have to be as lean as physically possible to look good. It's like, no, it's the wrong approach.
The biggest thing, I was
just going to say, just on that, something that I've also come across, and I'm definitely not a doctor, but just from experience with clients, I think the way you gain that body fat back and the control you have is almost just as important. Just anecdotally, we're talking about having to remove a stressor from the body. And so that can come, if you're very lean, by having some body fat on. But if that body fat comes on in an uncontrolled way through binging and binge restrict cycles across a week, that stressor can remain just as high, but body fat still comes back on. So if you have not addressed food issues as you go down and you come back up and you basically, let's just use the typical binge all weekend, then restrict during the week to try and balance it out or whatever, you can end up in the worst of both worlds, in which stress is still so high, menstrual cycle doesn't recommence or come back, and you gain body fat fairly rapidly as well, and you're not in control. Next thing you know, you're overweight without your cycle, which is a really bad place to be. If you bring it back and increase those body fat levels in a controlled way, normally also linked into that, not only you're not binge and restricting, so you're having more consistent feedings across the week, but you're probably eating higher quality food because you're in control over your nutrition, rather than just eating fish and broccoli during the week and then just going mental with like chocolate and sweets all weekend. You're actually getting some good nutrient quality across the week. So I think that's just another just caveat maybe to throw in there.
Do you think the stress is emotional? Is that what it is? Just the emotional constant roller coaster? Is that what you're referring to, Ed?
Well, I think that may be part of it. I think it's also, if you're binging the weekend, your body is still, and then restricting in the week, you're basically dieting all weekend.
Okay. Yeah.
So you're still actually, your body's still in a case sense of dieting. People who get into that cycle will normally go back to like pre-checkpoint-ish kind of, or like, diet calories during the week. Then they go crazy at the weekend. As we also know, binging is also really stressful on the body in terms of like piling on water retention. Your blood pressure is going to increase, all of this kind of stuff. So it's going between these two extremes where both sides of the coin, you're just throwing stress at them, rather than just finding a happy medium where you can actually kind of just
dieting culture has come up a lot in this conversation already, and it's, for some reason, I thought, we're moving away from it. I just had this idea that maybe it's just in the past. It's actually getting worse. And I was reading this thing, this came up on Apple News, where it talked about TikTok being a really is driving a lot of like teens, because it's a massive, we think it's a teen platform, but it's starting to grow more. But for teens are addicted to this thing, right? But they keep if you type in TikTok diet in Google and type in news, you can see so many different trends that they're pushing. For example, one I saw this morning was like the corpse bride diet, which is basically where TikTok inundating teens with eating disorder videos, where it shows you how to rapidly lose weight and then how to purge food. And I just think this is the stuff that people are seeing growing up. And I do wonder, when you see this when you're growing up, when your formative years, if you can ever really like recover from this sort of stuff, because you're associating, you're creating so many associations when you're growing up. I think this is going to be a massive problem in 10-20 years time.
I think I can't remember which article it was that I wrote for the site, but there was a Barbie doll released in the 60s or 70s that came with a diet book, and in the diet book, all it said was "don't eat."
Wow.
That was the diet book. Which is nuts, right? So, and again, this was in the 70s potentially. So, people have been inundated with this sort of stuff from way before now, but it's just more prevalent now. It's more visible now across social media platforms.
Well, it's just different media platforms, right? So
whatever they're doing, it's that same message of just starve yourself, smaller is better, this and that. It's crazy, man. It's really nuts. And unfortunately, a lot of we get this a lot. A lot of women come to us because they've been through the ringer of just being handled poorly, with regards to how to get in shape properly and stay there. Like it's such a rare thing to see these days, because it is hard. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of care and a lot of caution and patience. It's not something that can be done overnight. And unfortunately, many women in particular, they do seem to fall for the overnight, instant, quick fix things before they eventually go, okay, this is not the right approach.
Well, skepticism has never been higher in the fitness industry as it is now. I'm coming across, there's skepticism has always been there, but I think it's at a new level of high now. Whereas people are just so cautious of everything that they're hearing and seeing. And I think this podcast so far will be very refreshing for a lot of people, just because these sorts of topics are just not spoken about enough. And yes, we've targeted this to women because I think they just face more myths than men. Men's myths are usually around like muscle building, I think.
Yeah,
Or
and
looking
the
jacked,
consequence
right?
and the consequences are harsher for them.
Yeah, that's what it is.
If done poorly. Like honestly, like the emotional metabolic disturbances that can go for ages after a poor diet. You know, research recently, and I was looking at dieters in general, and 35% of people who embark on a diet, this is just like your normal general population, 35% of them actually end up with disordered eating tendencies. And then of that 35%, 25% end up with full-blown eating disorders. And I couldn't remember the exact stats on how many of these were women, but it was a very, very large majority. And this discrepancy between females and males in athletics is even higher when it comes to eating disorders, especially with things like gymnastics, things like ballet, diving, all those sort of sports, which potentially do have a higher female number, I guess. But the level of disordered eating and eating disorders that happens in athletes seems to be far more prevalent than even in Gen Pop. And again, the majority of that is coming from females.
Yeah. I think also though, a lot of that from what I've seen is linked to physical appearance again. I used to train, more athletic population, and a lot of like amateur and youth athletes, and I had a load of female figure skaters, and then like track and field athletes. And if they were talking about wanting to get abs or whatever, it wasn't often in the context of I want my core to be stronger so I can resist rotation when running or whatever it is. It was a female athlete on the athletics track is basically wearing a bikini near enough. They wanted their abs to look good. They want Jessica to look like Jessica Ennis because they're standing in front of hundreds of people in a bra and pants. Figure skaters, swimmers, all these people, gymnasts, they're either half naked or in very tightly fitting outfits. And so there is a pressure, even in the athletic population, to look a certain way that isn't even actually linked to performance.
It's even more. Yeah.
Well, that's why when we speak to most bodybuilders, guys included, who was it, Chris Barricott, when he came on the podcast here, he said he still suffers from body dysmorphia, and he said it's got worse since he's got into the pro ranks because he's just around guys who are just like in insanely good shape, and he's suddenly got this warped perception that he's either too skinny, too fat, and you look at him and he's in great shape, right? So it's prevalent there as well.
I think that just for going back to what Ivan said around the consequences being harsher for women, but just for any men listening, like this is all very, very applicable to you as well. I think regardless of your gender, if you're overweight, getting into like a healthy range is good, is definitely advisable. But from there, if you want to then take it to an extreme, you then have to weigh up the pros and cons and use a very deliberate approach. Because we as men, we haven't got a menstrual cycle to lose. However, if you're pushing really hard, it's very likely you're not able to get an erection for the last couple of weeks potentially. There's still going to be changes in that, and that probably almost definitely varies between men in the same way the cycles vary between women. But like we all have these potential knock-on effects.
Yeah.
But it's also so important, while we've stressed, and we've already talked about it on here today, is that's not a place for life. We talk about shape of your life and then return into a shape for life, and they're often two quite different things. And that's why you can't hang out there looking a certain way. You need to get back to that more sustainable approach. But the difference between your shape for life and shape for life, or maybe at least bringing your shape for life closer to what you want, is just going to be muscle and what we said. And this is where when Ivan was talking about women walking around with abs isn't realistic for most people. The reason is because of lack of muscle mass. If you gain muscle, you can walk around potentially with abs because you are going to look leaner at a higher body fat percentage. The more muscle you've got, if like let's say it's two people who exactly both got 20 kilos of fat on them. If one of them has got twice the number of amount of muscle, that 20 kilos of fat is being spread over more mass, and you're going to look better. You're going to have more shape, and also that 20 kilos is a lower relative percentage of the total mass. So the more muscle you build, the leaner you will look with the same amount of fat on you. And that's why I say, if you're untrained, you'll probably not ever be able to walk around with abs. and be, you know, fully functioning from a health and like performance perspective. I wouldn't say I'm
Can't
like,
carve a pebble, can you?
no, but I'd say now we probably walk around with some ab visibility, even, you know, probably 10 kilos above checkpoint weight. Definitely not, it's definitely not shredded or anything, but you know, you probably actually got physique that a lot of people would like to look like at that shape for life. Shape of their life. But the only reason that's been achieved is just from building muscle and almost bringing those two a bit closer together.
Yeah, that's the biggest benefit of building muscles. Like you can put in, and this is why we always use a stock market analogy, because you can only really realize this for after 5-10 years. I don't think you can build that sort of muscle mass that you're talking about in even 2 years or even 3 years.
No.
I think it takes like 5 to 7 years of legit training to get to the other side where you actually got what you said, where you can be at 10 kilos above your checkpoint, but you still look pretty good. You still got veins in your arms. You can still look good on the beach. You might have an outline of what's going on, but people know you're in good shape, right? But that takes so long.
Yeah, when we say the 2 years, we're talking about a 2 year cycle, and then it's almost like reassess. Because I think after that point, if you're like really into it and you're loving it, potentially you just keep repeating that. And then, yeah, maybe do 3 of them and you're going to look really, really different. But potentially after 2 years, you're like, you know what? I've got a decent, I look like I train. I don't look as my dream physique, but I'm pretty good. And then potentially just put it on the back burner a bit more, maybe just sit at maintenance and accept a slower rate of progress while you then go into more of like a lifestyle focused.
I think I remember hearing from like, again, this is from bodybuilding circles. They're saying like after 7 years of hard training, you're going to probably get most of the genetic gains you're going to get. After that, it's just 1% increments where you're just refining your physique, but you get the majority of your build come in those first 7 years or so of hard training, of legit training anyway.
Yeah, I think Jeff Alberts from 3DMJ, like I think he was comparing one of his stage physiques to one he did maybe 4 or 5 years ago to a more recent one. And even though he even said, he goes, I didn't build any more muscle between that time. I just was better at retaining the muscle I did have when I dieted down, you know, and
so true.
that was the difference between those two picks. They're like 4 or 5 years apart, right? And this guy has been training hard for years, you know.
Weirdly, I was studying my twisting back shot, that one, the twisting one, the Arnie style shot. I was comparing the picture to this year compared to the one before, and I was like, I'm actually technically a liar in that one. And yes, there's an element of being leaner, but I even just look like I look fuller for some reason. And I look like, I'm like, I've not really got that much stronger in the last couple of years. Like you're talking about 1% gains, right? But I think there's something to be said for pressing the 50s for 3 years versus pressing the 50 for one session, as an example. Your body just gets that look, right?
Yeah.
And it's for women as well.
Yeah. If you have more muscle mass on you, you can get away with more body fat on you, which is going to help you from a health perspective, right? Meaning that you don't have to lose so much body fat to look lean. You can actually look leaner with a higher percentage of body fat, which is a great place to be for most people. Because as we know, you know, having some body fat on you is health promoting, and yeah, especially for women. And
more calories you can eat each day, more flexibility with that food, potentially less activity required. You're going to probably be stronger in the gym, you know.
So you have
we just finished this saying that maybe getting fatter is a good thing.
Stay tuned for part 2.
Getting more muscular is a good thing.